Now let us talk about Chapter 1, The Surprising Power of Atomic Habits. In this chapter, an attempt is made to understand how small changes create big and clear results over time, and why most people ignore the power of these small steps. This chapter focuses on the fact that humans often keep looking for a big change. People think that to do something different in life, they need a big decision, a big action, or a big moment. But here it is clearly explained that real change starts with small decisions that are repeated every day. These small decisions do not seem very important at the moment, but over time their impact becomes very deep. The main idea is that habits work in a person's life like compounding. Just like compound interest grows slowly over time, daily habits also show their effect gradually. Becoming a little better in one day does not feel special, but in the long run, that difference becomes very big. In the same way, doing something slightly wrong every day does not show damage in the beginning, but later it turns into a big problem. This chapter also explains that people often judge themselves by looking at their current results. If the result is not good, the person becomes disappointed. But in reality, results are the outcome of past habits. What is visible today is the effect of old decisions. Therefore, the focus should not be on results, but on the system that creates daily decisions. A common misunderstanding is that if hard work does not show results quickly, then the effort is useless. This chapter explains that in most changes, results appear late. In the beginning, a person feels that nothing is happening. Because of this, people quit in between, while in reality, the effort is accumulating, but its effect is not visible yet. It is also explained here that breakthroughs often feel sudden, but behind them are long-term small efforts. From the outside, it looks like everything changed in one day, but internally, that change is built slowly. This understanding teaches patience and gives strength to stay consistent. In real life, the meaning of this chapter is very practical. If a person wants to change their health, work, studies, or relationships, they do not need a big plan. What they need are small, correct decisions made every day. Thinking a little better every day, doing a little better, and staying in the same direction. This chapter also makes it clear that habits can be both a friend and an enemy for a person. Good habits make time your ally, while bad habits turn time into an enemy. That is why understanding habits is very important, so they can be used in your favor. In the end, this chapter presents a calm but strong idea. Life does not change in one day. Life changes through small daily decisions. When a person understands the value of small steps and adopts them consistently, those small steps together create big and lasting results. This is the real lesson of this chapter. Now let us talk about Chapter 2, How Your Habits Shape Your Identity and Vice Versa. In this chapter, an attempt is made to understand that habits are not just daily actions, but they slowly become a person's identity. It also explains that what a person thinks about themselves controls their habits as well. This chapter begins by explaining that when most people want to change their life, they focus directly on results, like losing weight, earning money, or becoming fit. But here it is clearly explained that focusing only on results does not make habits last long. Real change comes when a person decides what kind of person they want to become. Here, 3 layers are discussed. The first layer is results, the second is process, meaning habits, and the third and deepest layer is identity, meaning how a person sees themselves. Most people remain stuck in the top 2 layers. They say they want to achieve something or build a habit, but they do not think about what kind of person they need to become. The main idea of this chapter is that until habits connect with identity, they do not last. If a person says they want to exercise, that is just an activity. But when they start seeing themselves as someone who takes care of their health, exercise automatically becomes a part of their life. A common misunderstanding is also cleared here. People think that first results will come and then they will believe in themselves. But in reality, it works the opposite way. Confidence is built by taking small actions first. Every time a person performs a good habit, they give themselves a small piece of evidence that they are the kind of person who can do this. This chapter also explains that every small action is like a vote. Every time a person repeats a habit, they vote in favor of that kind of identity. One time does not change anything, but repeating the same action again and again slowly changes identity. It is also made clear that changing identity is not a one-day task. It happens gradually. A person first takes small actions, then those actions build belief, and that belief becomes identity. This is why small habits are so powerful. This chapter also explains that a wrong identity can stop a person from growing. For example, when someone keeps telling themselves that they are not punctual or not disciplined, they unknowingly repeat the same habits. To change such an identity, it is necessary to start changing actions even if full confidence is not there in the beginning. In real life, this means that if a person wants to change their habits, they should ask themselves what kind of person this habit is making them. If the habit matches the identity a person wants to build, adopting it becomes easier. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that habits and identity constantly influence each other. A person becomes what they do, and they do what they believe they are. When this relationship is understood, changing habits no longer feels difficult, but becomes a natural process. Now let us talk about Chapter 3, How to Build Better Habits in 4 Simple Steps. This chapter explains how habits are actually formed and why some habits run automatically while others are difficult to adopt. It clearly states that habits are not magic, but a natural system of the brain that turns repeated behavior into automatic behavior. The main focus of this chapter is that every habit goes through 4 steps. First comes a cue, then a craving connected to that cue, followed by an action, and finally a result. These 4 steps together create every small or big habit. Whether a habit is good or bad, the brain learns through these steps what to repeat and what not to repeat. It is also explained that the brain creates habits to save energy. When a task is repeated again and again, the brain puts it on auto mode. This removes the need to think every time. That is why a new habit feels difficult in the beginning but becomes easier over time. This chapter also clears the misunderstanding that habits are built only through strong willpower. In reality, willpower is limited. If the system is not right, habits do not last long with motivation alone. The brain always looks for the easiest and most rewarding path. That is why habits that are clear, attractive, easy, and satisfying tend to stick. In real life, this means that if a habit needs to be built, the cue must be first identified, like when, where, and in what state the behavior begins. After that, it is important to understand what the brain wants from that habit. Many times, it is not the habit itself, but its result that attracts a person. This chapter also shows that habits do not form suddenly. They are built through trial and error. In the beginning, a person tries different methods and the one that gives a good result gets repeated. Slowly, that pattern becomes stronger and turns into a habit. Another important point is that habits become connected to identity. When an action is repeated again and again, the brain links it not just to behavior, but to "I am this kind of person." This is why old habits are difficult to break, because they become part of identity. The practical meaning of this chapter is that if a person wants to change their habits, they need not change themselves, but to change the system. If cues are clear, the process is easy, and the result is satisfying, the habit automatically becomes stronger. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that habits do not change life in one day, but daily small decisions decide a big direction. When a person understands the value of small steps and adopts them consistently, those small steps together create big and lasting results. This is the real lesson of this chapter. Now let us talk about Chapter 4, The Man Who Didn't Look Right. This chapter tries to explain how habits control decisions without a person realizing it, and how the brain automatically works by taking cues from the environment. This chapter mainly focuses on how the brain recognizes cues before a habit even begins. The main idea of this chapter is that every habit starts with a small cue. People often believe they consciously choose their actions, but in reality, many habits start without thinking. The brain constantly scans the environment, and as soon as it finds a familiar cue, it automatically starts a fixed behavior. It is explained that cues can be of many types: time, place, emotions, people around, or a previous action. For example, checking the phone as soon as you reach a certain place, or feeling like eating at a specific time even without hunger. A person thinks it is their desire, but in reality it is the effect of a habit cue. This chapter also explains that people often want to change their bad habits, but they fail to identify the cue. Until it becomes clear where a habit starts, it is difficult to change it. Most people focus on the last part of the habit, meaning the behavior, but real control lies at the beginning. A common misunderstanding is that a person needs stronger willpower, but this chapter shows that awareness is more important than willpower. When a person understands which cue triggers which habit, change becomes easy. Now let us talk about Chapter 7, The Secret to Self-Control. This chapter tries to explain what self-control really is and why people often misunderstand it. It clearly states that strong self-control does not mean constantly forcing yourself to stop, but designing your life in a way where wrong decisions automatically become fewer. The main idea of this chapter is that people whom we consider to have high self-control actually struggle less. They do not fight the battle of suppressing desires every time. Instead, they set up their environment in such a way that the triggers of bad habits do not appear in front of them. Because of this, their energy is preserved and they are able to make better decisions more easily. Here it is explained that most people believe self-control depends entirely on willpower. But this chapter shows that willpower is limited. If you try to restrain yourself in everything every day, exhaustion is guaranteed. That is why the right approach is not to fight every temptation, but to keep temptation away. An important point explained here is that our environment controls our habits to a great extent. What stays in front of our eyes enters the mind and turns into action. If the phone is always in hand, distraction is bound to happen. If unhealthy food is easily available, avoiding it becomes difficult. That is why self-control starts with changing the environment, not changing yourself. This chapter also explains that the easiest way to remove bad habits is to remove their cue. When the cue disappears, craving reduces and action automatically stops. This is why sometimes just changing a place, a routine, or making small adjustments can produce big results. A common misunderstanding is that if someone has low self-control, they are a weak person. But this chapter makes it clear that it is not weakness but a faulty system. In the wrong system, even good behavior breaks down, and in the right system, an ordinary person can perform well. In real life, the meaning is very clear. If you want to increase focus, removing distractions is more effective. If you want to stay healthy, keeping wrong options away is necessary. If you want to be productive, the environment must be supportive. Instead of fighting yourself every time, fixing the setup is the smarter choice. This chapter also teaches that self-control does not mean making life strict. It means making life easier, so that doing the right thing requires less effort. When the right option is easy, following it becomes natural. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that real self-control is not about winning battles, but about avoiding battles. The person who designs their surroundings wisely is able to maintain good habits for the long term. This is the biggest lesson of this chapter. Now let us talk about Chapter 8, How to Make a Habit Irresistible. This chapter explains why some habits feel easy to do naturally, while others require pushing yourself forcefully. It clearly states that habits are not built only through willpower, but attraction plays a very big role behind them. This chapter focuses on the fact that humans repeatedly do things that feel good internally or provide some form of pleasure. If a habit feels boring, the brain looks for ways to avoid it. That is why good habits like reading, exercising, or learning feel difficult, while using the phone or wasting time feels easy. It is explained that if a habit is made attractive, adopting it becomes much easier. One important idea in this chapter is that the brain is always searching for rewards. A person does not do an action for the result, but for the feeling they receive immediately. That is why if a habit does not feel good right away, the brain does not consider it important. At this point, the chapter explains that making a habit attractive means connecting it with a positive feeling. It is also explained here that habits are not formed alone, but are strongly influenced by the people and environment around us. People unconsciously adopt the habits of those around them. If something is considered normal in a group, the brain accepts it as safe and correct. That is why bad habits catch on quickly and good habits do not stick unless the environment supports them. A common misunderstanding is that building habits requires a lot of motivation. This chapter makes it clear that design matters more than motivation. If a habit is set up in a way that looks and feels good, motivation comes naturally. People prefer doing things that feel easy and enjoyable. It is also explained that people often see the benefits of a habit in the distant future but feel the discomfort immediately. For example, the benefit of exercise shows later, but tiredness is felt instantly. That is why the brain avoids such habits. This chapter teaches that adding a small immediate reward to a habit helps the brain adopt it. In real life, this means that if someone wants to build a new habit, it should be presented like a reward, not a punishment. The habit should feel like it adds something positive to life, not like a burden. Small things like the right timing, the right environment, and the right feeling can make a habit irresistible. This chapter also explains that people can design their habits smartly. When a habit starts to feel good, it no longer requires much thinking to perform. It slowly becomes part of the routine. In the end, the lesson of this chapter is very clear. Habits last when they feel attractive from within. If a habit needs to be maintained long-term, it must be made enjoyable, easy, and satisfying. This is how good habits become a choice, not a compulsion. Now let us talk about Chapter 9, the role of family and friends in shaping your habits. This chapter tries to explain that habits are not formed alone, but are silently and deeply influenced by the people around us, especially family and friends. It explains that human behavior is often the result of the environment a person lives in every day. The main focus of this chapter is that humans are naturally social. They learn by observing others, begin thinking like them, and slowly adopt similar habits. Family and friends are the closest groups in a person's life, so their habits, thinking, and lifestyle influence us even without words. If something is considered normal by the people around us, it gradually becomes normal for us as well. It is also explained that humans are most influenced by three types of social influence. The first is close people like family and friends. The second is larger groups like offices, societies, or communities. The third is powerful people whose opinion matter to us. This chapter specially focuses on family and friends because their presence is strongest in daily life. An important point explained is that people often believe their habits are entirely their own choice. But in reality, many habits exist simply because people around us are doing the same thing. If healthy food is normal at home, eating healthy feels easy. If staying up late, eating junk food, and procrastinating are normal among friends, those habits slowly develop. This chapter also makes it clear that humans seek acceptance. People want to fit into their group. Because of this, they sometimes adopt habits that are not actually good for them. Unconsciously, people shape their behavior according to the group so that they do not feel different. A common misunderstanding is that good habits are built only through willpower. But this chapter makes it clear that environment matters more than motivation. If a habit is set up in a way that looks and feels good, motivation comes naturally. People prefer doing things that feel easy and enjoyable. This chapter also teaches that people do not need to break relationships, but they must understand which environment encourages which habits. Gradually, they can increase the number of people around them whose habits support their growth. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that habits are not just personal decisions, but social behavior. When a person understands their surroundings and positions themselves wisely, good habits become sustainable. The right people, the right environment, and the right mindset together strengthen habits. This is the biggest lesson of this chapter. Now let us talk about Chapter 10, How to find and fix your bad habits. In this chapter, we learn how bad habits are formed, what their real causes are, and how they can be fixed. This chapter emphasizes understanding habits instead of judging them so that change becomes permanent. This chapter makes it clear that bad habits do not appear suddenly. Every habit has a reason behind it that grows stronger over time. Often people try to stop the habit itself but ignore the reason behind it. It is explained here that until the reason is clear, the habit will keep returning. The main idea is that every bad habit is part of a pattern. First, a cue appears, then the brain chooses a response, and finally a result is received. This result often provides immediate relief, such as reduced stress or escape from boredom. The brain remembers this instant relief and chooses the same path again. This chapter also explains that bad habits are not caused by lack of willpower. Many people believe they are weak and cannot change, but in reality, the problem lies in the system. If the cues and environment remain the same, the brain will choose the same response. That is why understanding the system is more important than blaming yourself. A common misunderstanding is that changing a habit requires a big step. Here it is explained that small changes are more effective. If stress is the cause of a habit, simply stopping the habit will not work. A simple way to manage stress must be added. Similarly, if boredom is the cause, the brain needs a better alternative. This chapter also shows that people often identify the wrong cause. They think the problem is the phone or laziness, but the real reason may be lack of sleep, a poor routine, or emotional exhaustion. When a person honestly observes what happens before the habit, the real cause begins to appear. In real life, this means that
Now let us talk about Chapter 11, Walk Slowly but Never Backward. This chapter tries to explain that the right way to build good habits is not by running fast, but by moving forward slowly and consistently. It teaches that progress is not about speed, but about direction. When the direction is right, moving slowly is acceptable, but moving backward is harmful. This chapter focuses on the fact that most people start building habits with a lot of excitement. They try to make very big changes all at once. For a few days or a few weeks, they perform very well, but as soon as fatigue appears or results do not show immediately, they stop. This stopping and moving backward becomes the biggest problem. The main idea is that progress in habits is always slow. But being slow does not mean being useless. When a person moves forward a little every day, a system is formed that lasts for a long time. It is clearly explained here that if a habit is made so easy that it becomes difficult to quit, then that habit is the one that lasts. This chapter also explains that many people think that if they cannot do something perfectly, then doing it at all is useless. For example, if they cannot exercise every day, they quit completely. But here it is explained that missing one day does not cause harm, but quitting again and again weakens the habit. Therefore, the rule is not that mistakes should never happen, but that even after a mistake, one should keep moving forward. A common misunderstanding is that if progress is not visible, then something is going wrong. But this chapter makes it clear that in the early stage, progress is often not visible, but internally the system is being built. This is the reason why many people quit even when they are on the right path. In real life, the meaning is very simple. If a person is doing even a little every day in studies, fitness, work, or any habit, they are moving in the right direction, even if results are not visible yet. But if they keep starting and quitting again and again, that is what moving backward means. This chapter also teaches that making habits easy is not weakness, but wisdom. When a habit starts to feel too heavy, the brain begins to avoid it. But when the same task is made small and easy, the brain does not resist. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that to move forward in life, being fast is not necessary. What is necessary is not stopping and not moving backward. Moving a little forward every day creates a very big change over time. This is the real lesson of this chapter. Walking slowly is fine, but moving backward is not. Now let us talk about Chapter 12, the law of least effort. This chapter explains that humans naturally choose actions that require the least effort. It shows that habits are not built or broken by willpower, but by easy paths. The focus of this chapter is that if a good habit needs to be adopted, making it easier is more effective than making it difficult. This chapter explains that the human brain always tries to save energy. The brain prefers decisions that require less thinking, less fatigue, and fewer obstacles. This is why people fail to do the right thing even when they know it, because the right thing often feels difficult. On the other hand, bad habits stick because they are immediate and easy to perform. The main idea is that to change habits, a person does not need to fight themselves, but needs to change the system. If a task requires too many steps, too much preparation, or too much thinking, the brain delays it. But if the same task is made easy, doing it starts naturally. This chapter also explains that people often consider motivation to be the biggest factor. They believe that if the mind is strong, the habit will form. But in reality, the brain always chooses what is easy. This is why people who maintain good habits for a long time do not make themselves stronger, they make their tasks easier. A common misunderstanding is that good habits should be difficult. People think that if effort is not required, there will be no benefit. But this thinking harms habit formation. It is explained here that the easier a habit is at the beginning, the faster the brain accepts it. Later, the same habit slowly becomes stronger. In real life, the meaning is very clear. If someone wants to read, keeping the book visible instead of hidden in a bag is more effective. If someone wants to exercise, keeping clothes and shoes ready in advance helps. If someone wants to reduce phone usage, keeping the phone away is more effective than repeatedly stopping yourself. This chapter also explains that bad habits do not exist because people are weak, but because they are easy. One click, one scroll, one order. When bad habits are easy and good habits are difficult, the brain always chooses the easier path. Therefore, it is suggested here that obstacles should be increased for bad habits and decreased for good habits. For example, if someone watches too much TV, keeping the remote away can be a small but effective step. Similarly, bringing good habits into sight increases the chances of adopting them. This chapter also explains that people often see failure as a personal weakness, but in reality, the problem is not the person, but the environment. When the environment is designed correctly, the right habit automatically feels easier. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that habits are not built through force. They are built on paths that require less effort. If a person learns how to make their actions easier, change begins to happen slowly and sustainably. This is the true message of this chapter. The smartest way to build better habits is to make them easier. Now let us talk about Chapter 13, How to Stop Procrastinating by Using the 2-Minute Rule. This chapter tries to explain why people procrastinate and how a very small rule can slowly break this habit. It explains that the pressure to make a big start is often the real reason behind delay. This chapter begins by explaining that procrastination doesn't happen because of laziness. In most cases, people avoid work because it starts to feel heavy and difficult. As soon as the brain perceives a task as big, long, or exhausting, it starts looking for excuses to delay it. This is where the 2-minute rule comes into play. The main idea is that the start of any new task or habit should take only 2 minutes. This does not mean the entire task will be completed in 2 minutes. It simply means that the beginning should be so easy that the brain does not feel fear. When the start is easy, the brain stops resisting. This chapter also explains that starting is the hardest part. Once a person starts, moving forward feels easier automatically. But if the beginning is made too heavy, the task never starts. The 2-minute rule removes this barrier. A common misunderstanding is that 2 minutes is too little and will not produce any benefit. But it is clearly explained here that the purpose of 2 minutes is not results, but habit formation. This rule works like opening a door. Once the door is open, entering becomes easier. It is also explained that this rule directly challenges procrastination. When a person tells themselves that they will do only 2 minutes, the brain stops making excuses. It knows that 2 minutes will not cause any major loss, so it agrees. In real life, the meaning is very simple. If you want to read, just open the book. If you want to exercise, just wear the shoes. If you want to write, just write one line. These small steps make the task easier and slowly move the entire work forward. This chapter also shows that the 2-minute rule makes habits sustainable. When a person takes a very small step every day, they do not feel like they have failed. They feel in control. This feeling slowly builds confidence. Another important point explained is that this rule also weakens perfectionism. People often procrastinate because they want to do everything perfectly. The 2-minute rule removes this pressure. Here, the focus is not on doing it right, but on starting. In the end, this chapter calmly explains that defeating procrastination does not require great strength. A small, easy, and regular start is enough. When a person makes starting easy, habits automatically grow stronger. This is the real lesson of this chapter. Change always begins with small steps. Now let us talk about Chapter 14. How to make good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible. This chapter tries to explain why adopting good habits feels so difficult and why bad habits happen automatically. The focus here is not on willpower, but on systems and environment. This chapter teaches that if the environment and process are changed correctly, good habits begin automatically and bad habits become difficult to perform. This chapter explains the main idea is that human behavior is heavily influenced by the surrounding environment. People often believe habits are formed or broken only through strong intentions, but in reality, the brain does more of what is easy. If a good habit is made easy, adopting it becomes natural. In the same way, if a bad habit is made difficult, the brain slowly distances itself from it. It is also explained here where most people make mistakes. They try to control themselves, but leave their environment unchanged. For example, keeping the phone nearby all the time and expecting not to get distracted. This thinking is not practical. This chapter explains that the easier way to change habits is to change the trigger itself. Making good habits inevitable means making them so easy and visible that avoiding them becomes difficult. For example, if someone wants to read, placing the book where it is seen daily. If someone wants to exercise, keeping shoes and clothes ready in advance. When the brain does not have to work hard to start, habits automatically form. Similarly, making bad habits impossible.
Now let us talk about Chapter 16. How to stick with good habits every day. This chapter explains that starting good habits may feel difficult, but maintaining them daily is an even bigger challenge. The focus here is on how a person can continue repeating good habits every day without excessive pressure and without constantly fighting themselves. This chapter begins with the idea that most people believe if a habit is good, it will continue automatically. But the reality is that even good habits are fragile. If they do not receive a little support every day, they slowly start to break. That is why creating a habit is not enough. A system is needed to sustain it. The main idea is that habits last only when they provide satisfaction. A person repeats actions that give them some form of positive feeling. If good habits are connected only with effort and discomfort, the brain starts looking for excuses to abandon them. That is why it is important to attach a small positive feeling to every good habit. This chapter also explains that people often quit habits because they look too far ahead at results. For example, someone starts exercising but sees no visible change in a few days and loses motivation. It is explained here that the brain wants immediate results. If nothing feels good right away, the brain assumes the habit is useless. That is why small signals are necessary to show that the habit is moving in the right direction. A common misunderstanding is that habits last only through strong willpower. But this chapter clearly explains that willpower is unreliable.
Fatigue, stress, and bad moods weaken willpower. That is why habits must be designed in a way that requires very little thinking to perform. It is also explained here that tracking is a very simple but powerful method. When a person can see how many days they have consistently followed a good habit, they feel inner satisfaction. This satisfaction increases the desire to repeat the habit. The focus is not on perfection, but on consistency. In real life, this means that good habits should not be treated as a heavy burden. If a day is missed, there is no need to consider yourself a failure. This chapter explains that missing one day does not cause damage, but quitting completely does. The focus should be on restarting the habit as soon as possible. This chapter also shows that identity plays a very important role. When a person starts seeing themselves as someone who follows the habit becomes stable. For example, seeing yourself as someone who reads a little every day, or someone who takes care of their health. This way of thinking strengthens the habit. Another important point explained is that connecting good habits with rewards is not wrong as long as the reward is appropriate. The reward should not harm the habit but strengthen it. This teaches the brain that the behavior is beneficial. In the end, this chapter calmly concludes that good habits are not magic. They are the result of small daily decisions. When a person remains patient, avoids putting excessive pressure on themselves, and relies on systems, good habits naturally become part of life. The real lesson of this chapter is that consistency matters more than perfection. Now let us talk about Chapter 17, How an Accountability Partner Can Change Everything. This chapter explores the difference between trying alone and sharing responsibility with someone else. It explains how being accountable to the right person helps make habits sustainable. This chapter focuses on the fact that people often break promises made to themselves. The intention is good and the plan exists, but when no one is watching, discipline weakens. This is where the role of an accountability partner begins. When another person knows what needs to be done and when, the mind becomes more serious. The main idea is that humans are social beings. The opinion and presence of others influence our decisions. When a person knows they have to report to someone, laziness and excuses automatically reduce. This pressure is not negative, it provides structure. This chapter also explains that an accountability partner does not mean a boss or a controlling person. The right partner is someone who checks in clearly, honestly, and regularly. Their role is not to judge, but to remind and maintain stability. A common misunderstanding is that a person with strong willpower can do everything alone. But this chapter explains that willpower is limited. After making decisions all day, the brain becomes tired. External support helps protect habits during such moments. This chapter also shows that accountability makes habits more clear and more measurable. When a person has to explain what they did or did not do, goals stop being vague. Even small actions become clearly visible. In real life, this is very easy to apply. The partner can be a friend, a colleague, or a family member. What matters is that check-ins happen at a fixed time and communication is clear. Simply saying, "We'll see," is not enough. It is also explained that accountability works both ways. When progress is made, it is acknowledged. When mistakes happen, excuses don't work. This balance strengthens habits. This chapter also shows that public commitment is more powerful. When a person declares their habit in front of others, breaking it becomes harder. Shame and respect work together. Another important point is that changing partners does not build habits. A stable relationship is more effective. Over time, trust builds, and that trust strengthens consistency. In the end, this chapter calmly concludes that change is not something to fight alone. Sharing responsibility with the right person makes habits easier and more sustainable. An accountability partner is not magic, but it is a part of the system that keeps a person from going off track. This is the real lesson of this chapter. Efforts made together go farther. Now let us talk about Chapter 18, The Truth About Talent. This chapter explores what talent really is, how far genetics play a role, and where effort and habits begin. It clearly explains that common beliefs about talent are often incomplete and misleading. The goal of this chapter is to help people understand their strengths. Now let us talk about Chapter 16, How to Stick with Good Habits Every Day. This chapter explains that starting good habits may feel difficult, but maintaining them daily is an even bigger challenge. The focus here is on how a person can continue repeating good habits every day without excessive pressure and without constantly fighting themselves. This chapter begins with the idea that most people believe if a habit is good, it will continue automatically. But the reality is that even good habits are fragile. If they do not receive a little support every day, they slowly start to break. That is why creating a habit is not enough. A system is needed to sustain it. The main idea is that habits last only when they provide satisfaction. A person repeats actions that give them some form of positive feeling. If good habits are connected only with effort and discomfort, the brain starts looking for excuses to abandon them. That is why it is important to attach a small positive feeling to every good habit. This chapter also explains that people often quit habits because they look too far ahead at results. For example, someone starts exercising but sees no visible change in a few days and loses motivation. It is explained here that the brain wants immediate results. If nothing feels good right away, the brain assumes the habit is useless. That is why small signals are necessary to show that the habit is moving in the right direction. A common misunderstanding is that habits last only through strong willpower. But this chapter clearly explains that willpower is unreliable. Fatigue, stress, and bad moods weaken willpower. That is why habits must be designed in a way that requires very little thinking to perform. It is also explained here that tracking is a very simple but powerful method. When a person can see how many days they have consistently followed a good habit, they feel inner satisfaction. This satisfaction increases the desire to repeat the habit. The focus is not on perfection, but on consistency. In real life, this means that good habits should not be treated as a heavy burden. If a day is missed, there is no need to consider yourself a failure. This chapter explains that missing one day does not cause damage, but quitting completely does. The focus should be on restarting the habit as soon as possible. This chapter also shows that identity plays a very important role. When a person starts seeing themselves as someone who follows the habit becomes stable. For example, seeing yourself as someone who reads a little every day, or someone who takes care of their health. This way of thinking strengthens the habit. Another important point explained is that connecting good habits with rewards